On today's show, Justin Rowan from the Chase Down stops by. We talk a ton about Darius Garland, the season he's had so far, plus why we both think that he deserves to be on an all-star team for the second time in his career. All that and so much more straight ahead on today's edition of Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? My name is Danny Cunningham. You might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like 92.3 The Fan, my new Substack, The Inside Shot, and Cleveland Magazine, just to name a few stops along the way. I want to say thank you to you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. The show can be found anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure they're subscribed as well. Check us out on YouTube as well. If you're watching this video right now, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up button for me, click subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show, of course, is sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Big thanks to Justin Rowan for stopping by today. We have a really good conversation about Darius Garland, how good he's been so far this year, bouncing back from what was just a terrible season last year for the Cavs point guard. He's been awesome. Both of us think that he's somebody that should find himself on the All-Star team this year. We also do, at the end of the show, we debate, the All-Star case between Garland and a few other guys. So definitely worth listening to as we get through this week without Cavs basketball. They're back in action Friday, taking on the Washington Wizards. But until then, we've got some all-star cases to talk about. Darius Garland is up first. So here's my conversation with Justin Rowan from the Chase Down. It feels like not enough of the conversation so far this year. Maybe it's because it's a little bit early, and maybe this is partially on me. But Justin, not enough of the conversation that I've been having has been about the all-star chances of one Darius Garland. We know what he went through last year. We don't need to rehash the fractured jaw and all the other things that led him to have a nightmare of a season. But he is, I don't know if I'm ready to say he's the guy I've been most impressed with the Cavs, but he has very much had the biggest bounce back season. I think you can make the case of almost anybody in the NBA. And I think his all-star chances are something that I think are worth diving into right now, because we know he's made an all-star team. He's somebody that I think should be looked at as maybe not a perennial all-star, but certainly not a one-and-done all-star guy either. And one of the things I like doing, because his counting stats are a little down, but that's because the minutes are down, because I do think Kenny Atkinson has made that a point, and the Cavs have blown a lot of teams out. But looking at his per 36 numbers are something that's very interesting to me, because he's been so much better this year than he was during that all-star season. I think right now the Cavs should have 3 all-stars, and Darius Garland no doubt belongs on that team.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And, to some extent, I feel like I'm being typecast. You want DG praise, you come to me. And you know what? I'm comfortable
Exactly
with that.
what I did, Justin.
I'm very, very okay with that, because, I'm here to spread the gospel of Darius Garland. I think he's been phenomenal this year. I agree. Going back to 22-23, I think that's another year where you look at the per 36 numbers, he was actually averaging more points per game than he did in his All-Star season, and he was doing it more efficiently. And I think coming into this year, we knew that the old Darius Garland was in there. But when you have bad muscle memory, like when you have a year as bad as last year, that can impact your own confidence. It can impact the teammates' confidence within you. It can just sometimes snowball where these guys need to have a new situation and a fresh start. I think one of the most encouraging things this season is that it's very clear that a fresh start, at least from a change of scenery standpoint, wasn't necessary to get Darius Garland back to form. And to your point, I agree with you. I think this has been the best season of his career. The defensive all-in-one numbers in terms of defensive EPM aren't really in his favor this year. It shows a drop-off from previous years. But I think a lot of that has to do with the three-point variance for some of the lineups when he's on the court. That really kind of weighs those on-off metrics. I think from an eye test standpoint, the defense is better than it's ever been, and his overall game is better than it's ever been.
Well, and I think as far as defense goes, and we can dive into this a little bit later on in the podcast, but I think he's also taking on bigger challenges on that end of the floor than he has in the past. Like I think in previous iterations of this Cavs team, Darius Garland would not be defending people like Trae Young. He would not be holding up as well against someone like Jason Tatum as he did when Boston was in town a couple of weeks ago. So I do think that is something that's worth bringing up. But I do think another part of this, why some people thought that a change of scenery was necessary for Garland and to have a bounce back season the way he did, is I think a lot of people actually underrate the first year that he had with Donovan Mitchell, where his per 36 numbers look pretty similar, if not a little bit better in some categories than the year that he made the All-Star team. His usage was just a little bit down because Donovan Mitchell was in town, and that guy is a superstar, like a true superstar. So that changed things a little bit, but I think he looks better than he ever has. I love the shot selection that he's shown this year, because one of my biggest gripes with Garland, who I've liked as a player since he came in the league, like I just have loved his game, but I didn't think that he shot the three-pointer frequently enough. Well, now per 36, he's taking over 8 threes a game. I think that's about where it should be. And if you're watching Cavs games, you don't need a stat to say this. You don't need anything like that. Just if you're watching, you can tell that there are 3-pointers that he is taking this season that the old version of Darius Garland would have passed up. And I think that's one of the biggest differences with him.
Yeah, and I think, this is where it's really helpful to have coaches that love working with guards, right? Kenny Atkinson loves working with guards. Johnny Bryant has been credited for, the leaps that we've seen from Donovan Mitchell, Jalen Brunson. And I'm sure, if you were to ask Darius about it, I'm sure he would get credit for what's happened this season. And I agree with you. And I think it's part of one of those good problems to have from a Cavs standpoint. When you look at the two most important building blocks that were here before Donovan Mitchell were Darius Garland and Evan Mobley. Both of those guys see the game at a high level, and they're trying to make the right play all the time. And sometimes that comes at the expense of their assertiveness. I still think that's something that you were seeing us work through with Evan Mobley. And I think it's still true for Darius at times. But what I love about the team this year is it looks like they're holding each other accountable out there. If Darius passes up one of those shots, Kenny's yelling at him, Donovan's yelling at him, right? Like it's a team-wide effort to push everybody in the right direction, because they understand when he is assertive, it opens up opportunities for everybody else. I think back to the series against the Knicks. The only game that we look competent on the offensive end of the floor, Darius was punishing New York every single time they went under on those switches. He was pulling from three. He was assertive in that game, and it opened up the offense from everybody else. And I think what you're seeing this year is that Darius is once again kind of that tide that raises all boats. And when you talk about his all-star candidacy, looking at the rest of the Eastern Conference, I think the fact that the Cavs are winning more so due to offense than defense this year is one of the main reasons why Darius should get that all-star nod. Because when you look at the on-off splits, nobody is impacting the offense more than him. They have a 113 offensive rating with him on the court. They have a 123 offensive rating with him on the court. He is taking them from a middle of the pack offense to the best offense in NBA history when he's on the court. And I think that kind of differential speaks to his impact more than his individual numbers even do.
Right. And I don't even think that you need the numbers to notice that. Like, I think that if you're not an advanced metrics type of person, and to be clear, like I look at that stuff almost every single day. But if you're not that type of person, if you're not that kind of fan, or just that's not how you view basketball, that's totally fine. But I think just by watching this Cavs team, you notice that it seems like everybody on the floor is better when Darius Garland is on the floor with them. He has done a great job of elevating his teammates. I think the rising tide, raises all boats comment for him is very applicable. And the assertiveness is something that does stand out, because it's not 100%. And you brought up Evan Mobley, and he needs to improve. I think that's kind of my biggest issue with him, is I just want more of Evan Mobley right now. But Darius is always going to make mistakes. Every player in the NBA is going to make mistakes at times. There's never been a perfect basketball player before. There will never be a perfect basketball player. But his turnovers are down, which I do think is something that's really important. And I think the style of turnovers are down. Think back to last year when he averaged nearly a career high in turnovers per 36 minutes. It was definitely worse than the first year when he and Donovan were together. And a lot of those turnovers, you would see him penetrate into the lane and sort of leave his feet without a plan Like he didn't know if he wanted to shoot. He was expecting a teammate to maybe be open and they weren't. And he would end up throwing an errant pass that would go out of bounds or would lead to even worse, a live ball turnover that would hurt the Cavs in more ways than just turning the basketball over. And that is the one thing that I look at and see, you know what, that's just, it still happens from time to time, but it felt like it happened once or maybe like 1.5 times a game last year. And it feels like it happens like once a week right now for the Cavs. And I think that is one of the biggest areas that I've seen that, you know, there's not a stat for number of turnovers after leaving your feet. Not one that I have access to. I'm sure the folks that have tracking access to everything know that number, but I don't. But it feels like that has to be down from what it was. Like he's just he's been a better decision maker and more confident, more aggressive decision maker this year.
Yeah, he has been. And I think this is one of those areas where the return of his strength, the return of his athleticism is really coming through, because I think it took so much for him to turn the corner and get by a defender's hip last year that he's already expended all of that energy. He's not really on balance. And I think that's where you see, you know, some of the poor finishing come into play, right? Where he's struggling to, you know, get on balance and drive the ball into the basket. I see that my camera is off, so apologies to people on YouTube. I don't know what's going on there. But, you know, I just think that him being on balance and in control and just, I think it's impacted his floater game. I think it's impacted his decision making. It's like a quarterback when they actually have their feet planted. They're able to make the correct reads and make the correct throws. And I just think you're seeing that return to form from him, where, you know, he's able to read defenses. I thought the Jared Weiss piece was really interesting, where he spoke to, in the past, like what my reads were kind of premeditated, and now I'm making those reads on the fly. And I haven't looked at the updated stats yet, but going into the Denver game, for players that had his usage rate and his assist percentage, the only person with a better assist to turnover ratio in the NBA was Jalen Brunson. When you look at 22-23, the only player with his usage and assist rate that had a better assist to turnover ratio was Nikola Jokic. That's the level of playmaker that we're talking about here when he is on his game. And I thought that was one of the biggest leaps he made going from his All-Star season to the following year. But because we only had that one season of an elite assist to turnover ratio, you didn't know if that was actually going to be a full-time feature of his game. So for all the other parts of his game to come back into the fold and him to still maintain that assist to turnover ratio, I think is a really, really encouraging sign.
So I think it's clear from what we've had in this conversation so far, we both think that Darius Garland should be an All-Star. Well, who do we have to worry about comparing him to? Who could he get the nod over? Who might get the nod over him? We're going to discuss those candidates next right here on Locked On Cavs. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is, of course, America's #1 sports book for a ton of reasons, but one of those reasons right now is that if you bet $5, you win $5. You're a new customer at FanDuel, you get $150 in bonus bets sent right back your way. That's right. Right now, FanDuel, bet $5, win $150 in bonus bets if you're a new customer. And FanDuel gives you everything that you need to place a bet when you have a hunch. You could be watching a game, whether it's hockey, football, basketball, college football, whatever it is, FanDuel has live betting. So maybe you really think that the Browns, who maybe didn't get off to a good start, could cover. Once that spread keeps up a little bit, FanDuel is the place to go. Plus, in the middle of the game, you can check out latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more. The very same page where you place your bets. That page, the FanDuel Sportsbook app. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com to join today. And like I said, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. That is one of the reasons why FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com, FanDuel.com today. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can check out the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave a nice review, be a friend, tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed, make sure they're subscribed as well. So, Justin, talking about Darius Garland as a potential All-Star in the Eastern Conference, and in having this conversation, we are operating under the assumption that Donovan Mitchell will be an all-star. I think that he has been probably, for my money, the best shooting guard in the NBA so far this season. He's an all-star lock. He should be an all-star starter lock. That is not a conversation. The conversation I do think is interesting because the Cavs have been good enough to warrant 3 all-stars. Whether or not they get 3 all-stars will be interesting, but I do want to talk about some of the guys that Darius Garland could be competing with. Guys like Damian Lillard, Jalen Brunson, again, going to leave Donovan Mitchell out of this conversation because it's a little bit of friendly fire with them being on the same team, being in the same backcourt. Cade Cunningham, I think, is another interesting name. But so let's start. I want to start with Dame because the Bucks have gotten off to such a poor start, and he's been a little up and down. Like he is, I think, as he's aging, he's becoming a more streaky player, if that makes sense. Like shooters have always been streaky to an extent, but I think as he's getting older, it's become a little bit more evident how his hot stretches and cold stretches have been. Who would you give the nod to between those two for an all-star spot so far this season, through a third of the season?
I mean, I'm a homer, so I'm going to say Darius.
You are? No.
Yeah. It's funny watching Bucks Celtics where, Boston attacked Dame in the similar manner to what they did with Darius. They were seeking him out on all of the switches. It's just kind of funny to see, Darius is a solid defender that is undersized at 6'1". Dame is 6'1". He is not a solid defender. Those possessions were a lot more fruitful for the Boston Celtics going up against someone like Damian Lillard. And I think, Dame is going to have those high watermark games where he is just a human blowtorch, where he looks like the old Damian Lillard. And, that player is a lot of fun. I think he should absolutely be in the mix to be an all-star. I'm not trying to, discredit him. But I do think as he's aged, you've seen some of those holes in his game become more evident, right? The defensive end is obviously at the top of the list. But I think one of the other things is he never really developed that off-ball game, at least to the same extent as, a Steph Curry or a Darius Garland. And I think that has had an impact on how effective he is from a team building standpoint, in his ability to play both on and off ball. And it's kind of funny that was the case playing alongside CJ McCollum, because you would have thought that there were opportunities there. But I just think from an all around impact standpoint and, using record as the tiebreaker, I'd give DG the nod.
I think I'm in a very similar boat. Their per 36 numbers are relatively similar. I do think it's interesting that Damian Lillard carries, I think, a bigger burden in Milwaukee than Garland does in Cleveland. That's because fair. He is, the Bucks don't have a third option the way that the Cavs have really 3 guys that can go out. And I think that this is actually the most important development from the past weekend with Evan Mobley hitting 6 threes against Charlotte is the Cavs kind of now have 3 guys that can go get 40, and Milwaukee has played without Chris Middleton for all but 1 game so far this season. So that has increased the load that Damian Lillard has had to carry, and credit to him for doing that. But I've been more impressed with what Darius Garland has done. And I think that the record thing as a tiebreaker does make a lot of sense because Milwaukee, while they are over 500 now, or they might be at 500 as we record this, they could be over 500 as you listen to this. With the record being the tiebreaker, like the Cavs are 21-4. I think that has to matter to a certain extent. I'm not saying that, they're 21-4, everyone gets to be an all-star, but I do think that has to be something that is part of the conversation. So next, I will ask you.
Yeah, so I'm sorry to cut you off, but
no, cut me off, please.
The funny thing is the all-star rosters have remained this size for, dating back ages and ages and ages, predating league expansion and stuff like that. If you're going to keep it at 12, right now that means that there are all-star caliber players that aren't going to make the cut. I think that was the case for Darius in 22-23. And if you are going to kind of have the concession that all-star caliber players aren't going to make the all-star team, I think, given how competitive the league is, that record should be the tiebreaker. Like I thought Jared Allen should have got in over Scotty Barnes last year. I thought, Pascal Siakam was better in his Raptors time than Scotty was there. So I didn't understand why he was getting in. Really, we should be expanding our rosters to 15. I think, NBA rosters are 15. All-star teams should be 15. But if you're going to keep it down to 12, I really think that the crunch should come down to record. Let's tell the story of the season to this point by rewarding the players that are sacrificing and contributing to winning the most.
That's a great point. They should expand, and I knew I could count on the guy that I think the only Canadian that comes on this show to talk bad about the Toronto Raptors. I knew I could count on you to do that, Justin.
No problem.
Up next,
I'm here for it.
What I think is an easy one, and this is a guy that made an All-NBA team last year. His team has been awful this year, but Tyrese Halliburton, where do you stand on him?
I mean, I don't want to be disrespectful. My first instinct was to be disrespectful. Yeah, he has not been as good as he was after those first 2 months last year. I think he already, as you said, he got the All-Star nod, he got the All-NBA nod, he got the Olympic nod. I think he got enough accolades for how good he was at the first half of last year that we don't have to
for 2 months.
Yeah, we don't have to continue that into this year.
Yeah, I'm with you. That has been the Pacers. And to be fair, and I guess maybe not to be fair, but to give credit to a lot of prognosticators such as myself, I didn't think that the Pacers were going to be very good. I thought they were very Atlanta Hawks-ish from a few years ago, and that turns out to be correct. One that I do think is a really interesting one is Cade Cunningham in Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
Cade's had what I think has been a really impressive season. The Pistons have been a much better version of the Pistons from years past. I think JB Bickerstaff is doing a lot of really good things there that Monty Williams couldn't necessarily do, which is why Monty Williams was let go and JB Bickerstaff was hired. But who do you think between those two guys would deserve that nod?
That's really tough because I think in a vacuum, I lean Cade just from a responsibility standpoint. I think he's been phenomenal. The only thing that's kind of hurting, and some of this does come down to those responsibilities, the efficiency isn't really there. Like the shot diet isn't fantastic. He is a very good two-way player. I would like to see him kind of get consideration for one of those wild card spots with the All-Star team. I think, he is kind of more of a point forward rather than a true guard. And I just think by nature of that position is going to have more impact on the game. It's why, big playmaking wings are the most coveted asset in the NBA. So, that is really tough, but, that is potentially one of those spots where, all right, what's the Pistons record when it comes to the All-Star break? If they're in like 10-11, you might have to give the nod to Darius in that spot. But I do think that Cade is having an All-Star caliber season. And because people don't give the Pistons enough credit, I think this is one of those spots where it's appropriate to do so.
Right. I do think it's interesting, the record tiebreaker conversation. I sort of lean Cade here because of the responsibility that he has. And, their per 36 numbers are relatively similar. Cade rebounds at a much, much, much higher level than Darius Garland does. And part of that is that he's a 6'9" point guard. And, but he also turns the ball over at a much higher rate than Darius, where he's almost at 5 turnovers per 36 minutes, partially because he doesn't have a ton of help. I think the record as a tiebreaker here would be a really interesting thing, because is it Cade's fault that the Pistons are where they're at in the standings, or would they be much, much worse without Cade Cunningham doing all that he's doing for the Pistons? So I think that is a really interesting discussion. Particularly if Darius is the third All-Star for the Cleveland Cavaliers versus the second All-Star for the Cavs. Maybe if Evan Mobley is number 2, I think that becomes a little bit of a more interesting discussion. Well, I've got at least 2 more guys to talk about. So we're going to dive into somebody from New York and somebody from Atlanta next, right here on Locked On Cavs. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is my go-to ticket marketplace. Game Time is your go-to ticket marketplace, or at least it should be. If it's not, let's make it that, because Game Time has everything you need for the latest events, sports, concerts, shows, whatever it is that you want to go take in, whatever event you want to be at. Game Time can help you get in the door. One of the things that I've been thinking about doing is trying to get to a college football playoff game, right? We have on-campus college football playoff games for the first time ever. I'm a fan of Notre Dame. I've looked at the ticket prices. It's a little steep for me, even with the best deals that Game Time has. It can be a little pricey trying to get into that first ever college football playoff game that's on campus. But I know that when I'm at Game Time, I'm getting the best deal. The other thing I love about Game Time is they will show me what my view of the field looks like, right? I told you I looked at Notre Dame tickets for next weekend. So I picked out a few seats. Okay, well, what do the end zones look like? What does the 50-yard line look like? You can do that all inside the Game Time app. I've done it. You should give it a try too. If you're not already, it should become your go-to ticket marketplace. And right now, new customers can download the Game Time app, create an account, and get $20 off your first purchase when you use code LOCKEDONNBA. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. If you're watching the show on YouTube right now, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up button for me, click subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content. Talking about Darius Garland, his All-Star case, who is in the conversation with him for one of those All-Star guard or I guess wild card spots in the Eastern Conference. We talked about a number of guys so far, but next is Jalen Brunson on my list, Justin. Brunson has had a really nice season for the Knicks. They've had, after a little bit of a slow start, I think highlighted by that Cavs win in New York, in which Garland outplayed Jalen Brunson down the stretch. They've played some really good basketball. Now, their schedule hasn't been the toughest, just like you could say for a lot of teams in the Eastern Conference right now with where this conference is at as a whole. But how do you view his All-Star prospects in comparison to Darius Garland's?
Yeah, I think the Knicks have been putting it together. They have been elite on the offensive end, and obviously Karl Anthony Towns is a big part of that equation. But I would still give the nod to Jalen Brunson. The Knicks have to have a representative in the All-Star game, without a doubt. I think they deserve two, honestly. I think both Brunson and Cat should get it. So, this is maybe one of those spots where it's a good thing that these All-Star teams are positionless. We should have probably said that on the front end. Outside of Boston, I don't know if there's a ton of wings that deserve consideration in the Eastern Conference. Like Paul George is not going to be in that mix. He hasn't played enough games and hasn't been good enough in those games to kind of dethrone some of these other guys that are driving success. So I definitely think that, if it was coming down to the last spot and it was Brunson or Darius, I would completely understand it being Brunson. I think that would be the correct decision. I don't think it should come down to that. But yes, I give Brunson the nod over DG.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Jalen Brunson should be a no doubt All-Star. I actually think he should probably be an All-Star starter alongside Donovan Mitchell. I think that should be the starting backcourt for the Eastern Conference. I think he's continued just really, I don't want to say like an unprecedented ascension from what he was in Dallas to what he's become in New York, but I also don't know how many people outside of the Brunson family thought this was possible for him, but he's a no doubt All-Star. Like he's been absolutely fantastic once again this year. Now I want to talk about Trae Young, because Trae Young, oddly enough, is a guy that was a big part of two of the Cavs' 4 losses so far this season. He's been one of the best distributors. He's averaging like 12 assists per game. He had I think it was 22 assists actually in a game against the Cavs earlier this season. He's not shot the basketball that well. I think the offense that he's created for himself has not been great, but the offense he's created for others has been really great so far this year. I think this is an interesting discussion, particularly because Trae Young has a little bit of star power, a little bit more star power nationally, just as like a brand than Darius Garland does. So I do think this is interesting.
Yeah, it is. And the most frustrating thing, I talked about this a little bit on the podcast after those Hawks losses, but the worst part is he played them pretty straight up. There wasn't a lot of the grifting and getting to the free throw line that drives you nuts with Trae Young. And it almost made it more annoying. Like he was just dissecting them with his passing. He's a brilliant playmaker. I think he's a big time difference maker. I would still give the nod to Darius. You kind of look at the frustrations, I think it's fair to say, the reported frustrations that the Atlanta Hawks have had with Trae Young and the lack of commitment with him moving forward potentially there. The team record, I think, comes into play. Like, guard is the most competitive position in the NBA. And there is so many talented point guards. There's so many talented shooting guards. These guys, it's really splitting hairs when it comes down to this position. But I just think that Darius's game is more conducive to winning. His ability to play on and off ball, his effort that he's giving on the defensive end of the floor, the way that he takes care of the basketball, and the way that he's elevated a very good offense to elite when he's on the court. I think all of that would be the reason why I would lead him over Trae.
So I think it's Darius, and I don't necessarily think it is that tight for me. Trae is, he's been awesome in terms of passing. He's averaging a career high in assists per 36 minutes, 12.2. He's also averaging a career low in points. He's scoring 20.9 points per 36 minutes. He's shooting terribly. His from beyond the arc, shooting 31% despite hitting a game winner against the Lakers. He's shooting just 38.5% from the floor overall. If you're that inefficient as an offensive player, and I get that the playmaking for others is terrific. He's one of the best in the league at that. But I don't think that he overall has been efficient enough as a player in terms of the scoring output that you need. That said, because he's Trae Young, I think that there will be some people that overlook this and say, you know what, he is everything, even if he really isn't everything. Like Jalen Johnson's pretty good in Atlanta too. But there will be people that say, he's everything for the Atlanta Hawks team. He makes them go. The only reason that they're, I don't know what the record will be when selections actually happen, but at this point, like hovering around 500 is because of Trae Young. Even if that's not exactly true, I think that's going to be part of the narrative with him.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is one of those times where you kind of have to think back to what a difference Darius made in the past. Like, before Donovan got here, that was a pretty thin team. That was a team that got by pretty much on the strength of their defense, and Darius was there to carry the offense. Right. They were the 3 seed heading into the All-Star break with Darius playing that role. And I think even when you look at this year, if you look at the Cavs offense with just Garland on the court rather than Donovan Mitchell, actually goes up to, if you look at the cleaning the glass stats in almost 700 possessions, it's a 129 offensive rating. The best offensive rating in NBA history is like 122.3 put up by the Celtics last year. 129 is absurd. If you look at, what happens in kind of those funky lineups where it's Garland, Mobley, and Allen, no Donovan on the court? It's a 136 offensive rating with like the questionable spacing of the 2 bigs and no Donovan Mitchell out there. Like Darius continues to elevate the offense to such a high level, and I just don't think we should penalize star players for playing with other talent and that working well. And what makes the Boston Celtics so special is they all kind of sacrifice moving towards that same direction, but they have so much all-star level talent. The Cavs have 4 guys that I think are worthy of all-star consideration. I think 3 will get serious consideration. And I think those 3 all deserve it, because if they were in a more featured role, I think they would get more of those counting stats, but they are sacrificing for one another. And the fact that it's working so well is actually working against them, because they get to sit a lot in the fourth quarter because they're up 20 to 30 points.
Well, that's why we've had to use per 36 stats for this entire exercise, because let's face it, Garland's counting stats are not that great because he's playing 30 minutes a night. Like that has been one of the best things. Like if you just care about the Cavs in terms of their championship aspirations, that's been one of the best things. If you care about recognition individually for these guys, that it might be better if Darius Garland were playing 35 minutes a night instead of 31 minutes a night. But that's, I think it's definitely worth what the Cavs are and how Kenny Atkinson has handled this entire situation. But Justin, thanks so much for doing this, man. Very much appreciate it. Get your plugs in.
Danny, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. You guys make sure first, because we are listening on Locked On, make sure you guys are liking, subscribing, and leaving reviews and all of that good stuff for Locked On. Then do the same thing for the Chase Down. Wherever you found this podcast, you guys know how to find podcasts at this point. They've been around forever. That's where you can find the Chase Down. You can also find us live on the Cavs YouTube channel. We go twice a week in season. We try to let people know ahead of time when those shows are going to be. But Danny, thank you so much for having me on.
Very much appreciate you. Thank you for taking the time. And thank you to you out there for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. Like he said, you can find the show anywhere you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure they're subscribed as well. And if you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up button for me. Click subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content. The Cavs are off until Friday. So tomorrow, same thing we did with Darius Garland today, doing it for Evan Mobley. Tomorrow I have another special guest joining me. So make sure you keep it locked right here with Locked On Cavs.